Hello everybody and welcome to the track 3 of Radiodays Malmö. Glad to see you all here in the conference center and hopefully we have lots of people watching this online. My name is Audiodays and you are all warmly welcome. The next case is very interesting and I am sure eye-opening for all of us. We'll hear from Mr. Babak Vakili, who is famous and awarded podcast personality from Podcast Denmark. His podcast asks, are you Danish or Iranian? Are you part of us or are you against us? Now, hear the answers as we are offered an insight to the mindset of Babak Vakili and his sensational podcast. Please welcome Babak Vakili. Stage is yours.
Hi. I'm good. How you guys doing? I'm doing great as well. I'll start rapping in Danish, but it's going to be a translation on stage, so be aware. Jeg voksede op på Nørrebro i 92, lige på grænsen til Bispebjerg. Før der var hipster her. Vi havde rygerklub som nabo. Vi havde en slåskamp i hver frikvarter. Det store og det lille, det var altid Karim. Han gemte sig bag toilettet i gården med kvæl og tag. Men alle vidste, hans far tager bæltet af. Det var dengang, Men alle vidste, hans far tager bæltet af. Det var dengang, jeg var forelsket i Tina. Samtidig Yasin blev sendt hjem til Palæstina. Jasmin blev først voldtaget et år senere. Myrdet, efterladt i gårdens container. 7 år gammel. Vi var bare børn. Snart blev vi ældre. Snart var vi bare, hvad de andre forventer. Vi gik med kniv og havde skarpe argumenter. Snart var vi bare en stak dokumenter. Snart sagde vi fuck P&K. Snart var vi perker. Sammen var vi stærkere. Snart stjal Mikkel sin fars mærser. Vrum, vrum. Vi gik op i North Face. Fodbold og hvem der har rekorden i Snake. Vi tog på børnen med buskort, der var fake. Besiger plejede altid at kysse på gangen. Ali var i parken, han gjorde bøsserne bange. Hamudi stak Samuel 22 gange. Over en joint. Hvil i fred. Jeg lavede damer med Patrick. Jeg lavede bomber med Søren. Han er konverteret og fået 2 børn. Alhamdulillah. Maria var den første, der viste min pik. Jakob lavede hovedspring for 10 meter web. Og i Mjølnerparken lød snakken. Ramin Sonic. Den kunne køre 90. Orale Karnal. Det var hvor Paco og Miklo, de lærte mig at sige. Hassan rullede dansker for 3310. Vi plejede at sige, fuck bad boy, de var blasfemi. Jeg øvede Tupacs tekster på vaskeri. Sammen med Ibo, indtil klokken den var 5. Jeg kan huske spurgte mig selv, hvorfor vil han ikke hjem? That was that. I was a bit afraid how that would work, but it seemed to work nice. My name is Babak Vakili. I am 35 years old. That's how you speak English. And I grew up in an area called Nørrebro in Copenhagen. And I guess my reason why I'm here is I made a podcast called Generation, which means the generation. Now, the word generation comes from the fact that I've always identified myself with being a second generation immigrant. And I wanted to make a podcast about that subject, but I didn't want to call it like the Browns or like us, the others, so I just thought generation was a nice word. Now, the next, I think 30 minutes, I'll be telling you about the podcast and about the background for it, the inspirations, and I've brought some examples of it, which I've also translated for you guys. But the podcast is, in short, a podcast about identity, about politics, and about hip-hop culture, and how those 3 things sort of interact, in my life at least. And I think what makes the podcast a bit special is that it has very different types of expressions. It has rap, it has fiction, it has documentary, it has scenes, it has. I try to really mix it up, and I'll be showing you how I try to do that. Now, for me, I've been rapping for maybe, yeah. You know how you get older and you keep saying 15 years, but then you realize it's been 20 years now. 5 years I've been rapping. No, I've been rapping like since I was a teenager, and I've always been like sort of like a political rapper. I never really blew up or anything, but like I've always had like lyrical miracle kind of. I don't know how many hip hoppers there are here, but I've always been like occupied with the lyrical aspect of hip hop, and this is something that I try to put into the podcast as well. After I started rapping, I started studying political science at the University of Copenhagen. And I was always, this is also a subject in the podcast, but in the beginning when I started studying, I was always like, I don't want to be affiliated with being an immigrant. I want to be myself. I'm a person. I'm a human being. I'm not like all these things. But then as I went on, I sort of understood that this is also a big part of me to be like a minority in Denmark. And this is also reflected in how my studies were, because I started really engaging in subjects that were about this theme. Then I worked at, after I finished political science, I sort of realized that I'm not going to be nor a politician nor a bureaucrat, and I started working at this youth theater, which has also been a huge part of the podcast, because this theater in Copenhagen that's called Contact works with personal stories. And here I learned that it's through the personal connection and like emotional connection that we actually open up to understanding things that might not be equipped to understand beforehand. So this is also why I'm actually using my own personal story in the podcast. And last but not least, I'm a scriptwriter. I write fiction, and I wrote a TV series for Denmark's radio called Radiodays. I don't know how many people who are not from Denmark who have seen it. I've been told Sweden and Norway actually just bought it, but this is also a huge part of the podcast, the layer of fiction. So this is like, I've always thought that dramatizing emotions makes it like much more interesting. All right. So there's a very certain episode that made me think of doing the podcast, like the theme of it. This was 10 years ago. I was doing a workshop, like a rap workshop, and this kid in this picture, he came up to me, and he was like 6 or 7 years old, right? He couldn't really write or read, but he was very, very cute. And he was like, I want to rap today. I want to rap today. And I was like, all right, but then just sit down. And you have to write something in order to rap. You can't just go on the microphone. This is the rules of my workshop. So he was sitting there for 20 minutes by himself. This kid who can't really, like, doesn't master the language. And he sat down, and I was trying to help him as well. He was like, no, I'm good. After 20 minutes, when we're done writing, he comes up to me and he shows me what he's written. And this is the real picture. It actually says, my name is Anas. Don't fuck with me, I'll kill you. Now this was obviously very funny, right? Because like there's this young kid who's very cute and harmful, obviously, but why is he writing this? And it sort of stuck with me. This is 10 years ago, but it's always stuck with me. Like, why did this innocent young kid, when he's asked to pour out his heart, why is this what he says? And I sort of realized that if this was me in his age, I would have probably done the same thing. Which leads to the fact that growing up as an immigrant in Denmark, you're sort of against society. You sort of feel like society is your enemy. And this comes from many places. And Generation, my podcast, is an attempt to look at where does this come from? It comes from mainstream media, but it also comes from like ourselves. It also comes from politicians and so forth. So this is sort of like, I asked the question, how do we become who we are when everyone is trying to tell us who we are, basically? So another thing that was a huge inspiration was this podcast. I heard it mentioned in the, I don't know, it seemed like everyone in the building was here earlier, but they heard this mentioned. It's a podcast called Have You Heard George's Podcast, which my editor, Sandomia, who's sitting right there, she sent me after listening to it at a conference in London. And she was like, check this thing out, because we've worked together before, and she knew that I was into politics and I rapped, and I listened to this, and it completely blew my mind. This is like a, do people know this podcast? We're at the Radiodays Europe. All right, everyone knows this. Basically, because I'm a rapper as well, and I thought that, okay, this guy pulling this off, as like, it's really amazing. So it sort of really gave me you know how when you're really inspired by something, I was like, I want to do something that has that familiar, that same energy to it. So I sort of like, I did not write this down when it happened, but these were sort of like the guiding principles in terms of like, not copying, but being inspired by his podcast. I wanted it to be creative, first and foremost, because this is what, when I heard that, I thought this is just like a bombshell of creativity. I wanted it to be intelligent. I wanted it to be critical in the sense of talking about society, not being about my own life, but when it is about my own life, it should always have like a perspective, a broader perspective. And the lyrics are obviously part of it. I want it to be unpredictable, I want it to be funny, and I want it to be just new in its way it's telling stories. So I set out to do that. Now, I brought like 3 examples with me here. And the first example, I want to talk a bit about like the background of it, right? This is me and my cousin. And I don't know how you guys are, but he's not my real cousin. But like we grew up together, so we call ourselves cousins. When I grew up, the question I was always asked, and all my friends were asked, was, what are you? And this was not 2022, so it didn't mean gender, or it meant, what is your nationality? Or what is your, like, where do you belong to, in a sense, right? And it always stuck with me, this question, because it followed me through my entire life. And in later years, it actually changed to, are you integrated in society? Or are you, and the more I think about the subject, the more I feel like it wasn't fair what happened. I'm talking about, I've been violated, but it was actually, I feel, sort of a violation of young people. Because it's fair to ask grown-ups, like, where you're from or what's your identity, but when you're a kid, you just need to be a kid, right? You shouldn't think about, am I Muslim? You should be like, am I fast at running? Or like, am I a good friend? Or do I have nice toys? Or like, you should just be in the moment. But our destiny, I've come to think, has always been that we've been forced to think about ourselves way, way too early. And this is something that most people like have a problem with, but they deal with it fine, like eventually. But it's also something that from a very, very early stage in a person's life tells people that you're different. And this is not just ethnicity, right? A lot of people experience this fact that the second you step into a room, someone asks you about something about you. So I thought, how do I take this feeling? How do I take this feeling of always being interrogated and translate it into sound? First I thought, I'll use children, because that's also always something that sort of speaks to the emotions, right? But it's also because it happened when we were kids. So I asked two kids to reenact the scene where they're in front of a bouncer. You know, this classic, some two minority youth trying to get into a club, but they can't get in. But only the kids are just trying to go play football in their yard. And they're met by a man who's interrogating them about where they're from, the same way a bouncer or a doorman would do, right? Yeah. I hope this works with the video. The video will work, but I hope you guys will follow.
Har I ID?
Vi skal bare ind og spille.
Har I ID?
Vi skal bare ind og spille fodbold.
Vi vil bare være børn.
I skal have ID.
Her.
Har I været her før?
Ja, masser af gange. Vi spiller altid fodbold her.
Dengang var spørgsmålet ikke, hvor er du fra? Spørgsmålet, det var...
Er I danskere?
Vi skal bare ind og spille fodbold.
Der står her, I er danskere. Er I det?
Vi er halv-halv. Jeg er halv iraker. Jeg er helt iraner. Han er halv iraner.
Det kan man ikke være. Hvad er I? Er I danskere?
Spørgsmålet kom fra alle vejen. Politikere, journalister, selv fra ens lærere, pædagoger og klassekammerater.
Jeg har brug for et svar.
Vi ved det ikke.
Der var ikke noget midt imellem. Ikke noget måske. Ingen plads til at være i tvivl. Enten var du, ellers var du ikke.
Hvad skal vi sige? Skal vi bare sige, vi er danskere?
Man skal være dansker for at få lov til at spille.
Rolig.
Det er ikke så svært.
Vent lige lidt.
Er I danskere, eller er I iranere?
Vent nu lidt.
Man kan ikke være begge dele.
Rolig.
Langt inden vi overhovedet forstod, hvad det vil sige at være dansker, eller iraner, eller iraker, eller hvad en identitet var, så skulle vi forholde os til, hvad vi var. Vi blev tvunget til at vælge.
Der står andre mennesker i køen.
Hallo, så fuck dig.
Så er det nok. Afsted.
Fucking dansker. Vi er perker.
Now, translated the word spics. I don't know if it makes sense. The word pagan in Danish is like a very bad word for immigrants, right? But this is something that I called myself, and sometimes also call myself, but this is who we were, right? And I've always been interested in, like, why do we call ourselves this word? It's like the N-word in America, right? And basically, not to compare it to the United States because there are many, like, historical differences. The thing is, I feel like I try to show here that we actually did not know what either thing meant, but we always felt that there was a resistance to us on the other side. And that's why we sort of like, we were over here. And we either call ourselves Paga, or we were like, we're from Nørrebro, the area I grew up in, or I also call myself like Persian Prince, or like so many like identity things that the only thing they meant was that I'm not over there. There was no like meaning to it really. We were just the others. And this is also something I deal with in the podcast, is that this is very dangerous for someone to grow up and not really have a core, not really know that the word that I am sort of like identifying with has no meaning. I was going to say something. So one of the things, to just the last point about to end this, is that it was also very difficult to, it sounds stupid, right? But you needed one word. It wasn't like being like, I am Danish, one word. And there can't be any like dashes in between or half-half. As a kid, you just longed for that one word that told you who you were. And as an adult, actually, after I did the podcast, I've been thinking about it. I found out like, fuck that word, right? Just say whatever you are. But as a kid, it was so important to feel that this is my box and this makes sense for me. And I think a lot of my generation never felt that, because at home, they identified with their parents in many ways, but in many ways not, and vice versa, as in terms of society. All right. Another thing, this woman is called Pia Kærsgaard. In the rap earlier, we said fuck Pia K. She is the founder of the Danish People's Party. And she's sort of been the symbol of like the racist politician. She ruined our lives in our childhood, right? This is her young. Anyway, I wanted, in the podcast, the first episode is about like hip hop culture and how that has affected our identity. The second is about like color and how just being in a like white room and stuff like that, how that affects you. The third episode is about politics, and the fourth episode, I go back to Iran. So it's basically about my relationship to Denmark and my relationship to Iran. And it's also my mother's story of how she came here. Growing up in Denmark, there's always been this resistance in terms of us like leaning towards our background. And I'll explain that in a minute. Have you heard George's podcast? In the second season, he talks to Uganda, I think it is, as a person and I just thought, that's nice. That's very like well thought of. And I imagined, what if I had a love triangle where Denmark is like my significant other, who I grew up with and who loves me, but it's complicated. And Iran is like the exotic other lady who I'm not having an affair because, she's still, because growing up in Denmark, it was always like, I don't know how many people can relate to this, but like, when we spoke our own language, like our mother's tongue, in my instance, it's Persian. There's always been like that, speak Danish. We're in Denmark now. Or if people go traveling back to their original country, like, why are they going back? Why are they not integrating? Why they? And I sort of feel like this possessive partner, right? who can't deal with you also being interested in someone else. So I imagined like, what would that sound and look like? And I realized I wanted to make it like a very intimate, lovey-dovey, like also over-the-top intimate, like lovey-dovey room where we pillow talking basically. And another reason I thought this was interesting was because I feel like if I criticize Denmark, like I was born and raised in Denmark, right? If I criticize Denmark, then I am all of a sudden like an outsider criticizing. Like, if you don't like it here, then like. But the whole point for me is that I love Denmark, and I want to be able to say that and also say that I dislike Denmark, because that's how relationships are. That's like you can love and hate someone at the same time. So I thought this whole way of dealing with it, you'll hear it in a second, put that very, very nicely. It's 3 parts here. The first part, I'm breaking some big news to my partner, who is Denmark. We're pillow talking. The second part, I am pillow talking with Iran. And the third part, like the structure of the episode is, I leave to Iran and I'm in love with Iran, and then I figure things out by myself and I call Denmark in the end of it, all right? So that's the end thing. Now, I hope it's big enough because like it's subtitled. Like not that big. I hope you can see it, or else I don't know what to do. All right.
Ja, så var han bare sådan,
Can you see it?
er det ikke lidt mærkelig stil, eller er det bare mig?
Ja, det er lidt mærkeligt.
Er du træt?
Nej.
Er der noget i vejen så, eller?
Nej, hvorfor?
Du lyder bare sådan lidt, du er bare lidt stille.
Nej, der er ikke noget.
Nå, okay.
Danmark,
Ja?
hvad vil du sige til, hvis jeg rejser et stykke tid?
Skal du besøge hende?
Nej, slap nu af.
Lad nu være med at lyve.
Hvorfor skal du altid være så dramatisk?
Er det mig, der er dramatisk?
Okay, jeg skal besøge Iran. Og hvad så?
Og hvad så med os? Du kan ikke både være sammen med mig og sammen med hende.
Hvorfor ikke?
Hvad tror du, det her er?
Hvorfor kan du ikke bare prøve at støtte mig?
Støt dig. Hvem er det, der har elsket dig, passet på dig, hjulpet dig igennem alt? Er det hende, eller er det mig?
Og hvem er det, der har såret mig?
Jeg gider slet ikke gå ind i den her. Det her handler bare om, at du aldrig har været mand nok til at hvile i dig selv, og ignorere, hvad de siger om, at vi to er sammen. Men hvad med, hvad du selv synes er rigtigt, hva'?
Hvad hvis jeg ikke ved, hvad jeg synes er rigtigt?
Lad være med at lade, som om du er forvirret. Det er du ikke. Du er bare bange.
Jeg er ked af, at det skal være sådan her.
Lad være med det der.
Det er noget, jeg er nødt til at gøre.
Du skal ikke ringe til mig, når du kommer tilbage.
Now it's Iran.
Er du glad for at være her?
Ja, jeg er glad for at have mødt dig.
Er jeg, som du havde forventet?
Ja, på nogle måder.
Hvad mener du?
Jeg kendte dog godt lidt. Jeg besøgte dig jo, da jeg var teenager.
Er jeg ikke lige så flot, som du husker mig?
Jo, du er bare... Kender du ikke det, når man ligger helt tæt på nogen, som vi gør nu? Så ser de bare lidt anderledes ud. Du er stadig smuk, bare rolig.
Har du hørt fra hende?
Hørt fra Danmark? Nej. Hun vil ikke tale med mig. Hun er sur, fordi jeg er sammen med dig. Men jeg så, hun har skrevet, at hun var blevet overfaldet.
Overfaldet?
Ja. Af en, der hedder Omar.
Er hun okay?
Det ved jeg ikke. Det tror jeg. Det irriterer mig bare, at jeg skal sidde her og være sammen med dig, og så tænke på hende.
Det er fordi, du elsker hende.
Hvordan kan man elske nogen, der behandler dig så dårligt?
Hvordan kan man have nogen, som altid har elsket dig?
And now it's me coming back from Iran.
Jeg har det som om, at den der støj fra køleskabet, som man aldrig har lagt mærke til, kørte i baggrunden. Ved du, hvad jeg snakker om? Som om den pludselig er forsvundet. Som om jeg altid har haft et hul inde i mig, som en fantomsmerte, jeg bare ikke var klar over.
Kan du ikke bare komme til sagen, når du er på vej hjem?
Ja.
Sorry. Du har bare brugt rigtig lang tid på at snakke om det der nu.
Det er fint. Henter du mig, når jeg lander?
Måske.
Jeg ville blive glad, hvis du gjorde.
Hvorfor?
Fordi
Hvad?
Fordi jeg elsker dig. Elsker du mig?
Måske.
Hvad måske?
Vi ses, når du lander.
And when I was editing this for this presentation, actually, like, this is a real feeling. Like, this is really how I feel about Denmark. Like, I'm not talking about like Danish people, but like Denmark as a concept. Like, but do you really love me the way I love you? Anyway. So the last point of inspiration, the last thing I'm going to play is when I was studying political science. This is the first idea, my editor, she gave me the reference and she was like, look, let's do something that has this feeling, right? That has this feeling of energy, this feeling of like unpredictableness and like intelligence and stuff like this. And the first thing I came to think of was this report I read, which is the history of the Danish welfare state when I was writing one of the theses I wrote too. And I remember when I read this, I thought it's just so fucking boring. It's amazingly boring. But it's also very important, right? Because I was reading about how the ghetto, in the podcast I called it like the block, because I argue like the ghetto is not a good term, but how did that become what it is today? And it was so like important. It was not simple. It was very complicated, but it was also very, very difficult to understand. And I remember back then I thought like, what if you made something that made this easier to understand and made it like popular in a way? So I thought about the idea of, how there's this stereotypical image of like 4 immigrant guys riding in a car and just like, so I wanted to do a car ride where 4 of my friends are in the car and we're just talking like bullshit. We're just like friends do, right? But then this car, it drives through history. So it starts in the beginning of the public housing sector's history, and it rolls through the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. And every time a new era starts, like the music follows along. Because we're doing a podcast and music, sound is important. I was told I needed to summarize my notes. This was it. So this was very difficult to put on video with translation, so bear with me. The guys talking are up there, and the speak I'm doing is down here. It's not at the same time. And my initial idea was actually that, we drive through, and the later the more present it becomes, the worse it gets. Like we run out of gas, and the police stops us, and then I wanted to do. My editor's laughing because I wanted to roll through when the kids they come through the parliament, and then I wanted the parliament to be do a drive-by shooting as if they're shooting at us, right? But then I was told that it sounds like we're shooting at them, so we canceled that out for the sake of understanding. Okay. Hope this works.
Hvad sker der?
Can I turn it up a bit?
Glem det der. Jeg kører ikke, hvis jeg ikke sidder foran. Nej, jeg
Du har altid siddet bagved, du skal stadigvæk sidde
Bare lad ham sidde, mand. Stop nu af.
Hvor der fuck ind med dig bag, man. Jeg må sætte mig foran.
Sæt dig ind på bagsiden af min blogmobil, og lad os rulle gennem bloggens historie. Vi starter i 1880'erne. Allerede dengang støtter staten de fattigste i samfundet med et sted at bo. Men som vi kører forbi 2. verdenskrig, ser vi, at der pludselig er rigtig mange fattige i samfundet. Derfor begynder staten selv at bygge de steder, vi i dag kalder for blokken. Ideen var, at alle skulle have råd til et nice hjem.
Er du trist, og har du sorg i sindet, så tag med mig ned til blokken. Jeg kører gennem byen i min Jaguar, bruger 100 krudtsedler, når jeg tænder min cigar. Men hvad fanden hjælper det? Og alt hvad jeg har, når jeg er den grimmeste mand i...
Vi cruiser igennem de glade 60'ere, hvor Danmark stadig er et hvidt samfund. Vi har ikke fået særlig mange indvandrere og flygtninge endnu, men folk har fået flere penge mellem hænderne. Det går godt i Danmark. Og det er på det her tidspunkt, at regeringen ændrer loven. Så hvis du er en familie med penge, kan det nu bedre betale sig at købe et hus, end at blive boende på blok.
Hallo, fuck.
Jo, pas på ham der, jo.
Kig frem, mand.
Søndagsblis, mand. Jo, jeg siger så, at du kører galt lige om lidt, mand. Kan du ikke se, fuck, jeg kommer mod dig? Det er tredje gang.
Man kan ikke finde ud af at køre bil,
Hvor man tror du, mine forældre flygtede fra krig, så jeg kunne dø i den her bil?
Når vi kører forbi blokken i 70'erne, står den næsten tom. Der er byggeskader og mange sociale problemer. Det er dem, der har penge for længst at flytte i et parcelhus. Og dem, der er tilbage, det er arbejderklassens børn.
Henrik har forladt mig for at tjene som soldat, så nu går jeg rundt og lever helt i celibat.
Ah, Vivi, den blinker nu. Fucking perker, man. Jeg ved godt, du kender den. Jeg ved godt. Det er fucking svært. Bare fyld bens op, man.
Når blokmobilen rammer 80'erne, begynder Danmark for alvor for flygtninge og indvandrere. Dem har staten ansvaret for at placere. Og gæt, hvor de bliver sendt hen.
Lad mig sige noget, jeg tager.
Slap af. Bare lad mig snakke med. Pæn goddag. Hej. Ja, vi er bare ude at køre en tur. Ej, stille og roligt. Nå, 4 mand, der ligner os.
Da vi når 90'erne, er mange på blokken pludselig blevet brune. Og de bliver symbolet på indvandring til Danmark. Det er også på det her tidspunkt, at blokken begynder at blive kaldt for en ghetto. Selvom, fuck it. Og de sidste 20 år har skiftende regeringer indført særlige regler, sænket indkomst og hævet straffen på blokken.
Man får ikke nogen til, og undskyld mit sprogbrug, til at skride af helvede til. Det er bare at sige, at de skal skride af helvede til.
Politikerne har med andre ord skudt løs på blokken.
En bred vifte af initiativer er de seneste år sat i søen for at komme ghettoerne til livs.
Det er stenørkener uden forbindelseslinjer til det omgivende samfund.
De tillukkede boligblok.
Da jeg besøgte Tosbogård.
Når man bruger S-togslinjerne.
Høje kriminalitetsrater.
Så skal man jo ikke være bange for at tage hjem om aftenen.
Der er simpelthen nogle områder i det her land, hvor slaget er tabt.
Fordi der er 15-17 indvandrerdrenge, der ikke kan finde ud af at opføre sig ordentligt. Og generelt uimødekommende omgivelser.
De mennesker, der bor i ghettoen, de er forsørget via offentlig forsørgelse. Ghettoproblemerne, de er så store.
Man kan stille et spørgsmålstegn ved, om det i virkeligheden er Danmark.
Det er det, vi taler om.
That was it. Thank you. I don't know, are we doing questions or?
Yes, thank you so much, Babak Vakili, and we have time for a few questions if you have one.
One.
Or
Very
two
good.
maybe.
One
It
very
was
long
really
question.
inspiring and eye-opening, so thank you very much. Please raise your hand. Okay. She's faster, so it's better this way.
Hanna Silman from Swedish Radio. And I wonder a little bit about how you work together, because I understand that for you, this was a really personal story also, but with the society and all the common things for many people. And how was for you then to work with the material? Maybe sometimes say that now it's too personal, now we have to, or how did you work together?
Maybe you should answer this.
Well, as Babak said, I heard this Have You Heard George podcast and thought I would love to do this, but I can't since I'm not brown, I can't rap, I can't do any of these things. And I thought of Babak and sent it to him. And actually, I think it's the other way around. I kept telling him, make it more personal, make it more personal. What did you feel? And you got so tired of it, didn't you? I think every time it got too general, I didn't connect with the story the same way as when Babak put himself in the middle, but all the time with the aim of speaking of society. So actually, I think I kept pushing you to go more personal. I hope you're okay.
Even though I worked in a youth theater where we learned that the personal story is the power of the story.
Did that answer your question?
Sorry, please wait for the microphone.
She said that she pushed you to do it more personal, but what did you need a trust, or what was important for you to be able to do that?
We worked together already, so we knew each other quite well, and I knew that I wanted to do with Sandra because she's a sound geek in the sense that she really, really cares about being innovative in podcasts, and I knew that that was both our aims. Actually, my aim with the story was not, and this sounds not that romantic, but it was more to make a new type of podcast than to tell a story about being a minority. But as it happens, this was just a subject that I knew so well and that I've dealt with my entire life that was a subject that I was doing it with. But the most important thing for me was to actually make a new type of product. And in that sense, I really, really trusted Sandra, but also just in general. But we had the same aim. We were very, very ambitious, both of us.
Yes, we have a question there.
Can I ask you a provocative question, Babak?
Yes.
You won every award possible in Denmark. What has this done to you and what you want to do with your art?
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel vindicated? Do you feel what?
I've rapped since I was 13, right? And I'd had people you're the best MC in the world, or your lyrics are crazy. But I really had nothing to show for it. And I made podcasts and blah, blah, blah. And I think this is sort of my friends at least tell me, my friends who followed me my entire life, they're this is when it sort of all adds up and comes together. But no, it hasn't done, obviously I have a bit more choices professionally now. But I'm 35 years old, so it's too late to be how it gets to your head? I have the people in my life and I'm good. You can answer that question as well if you want.
Great. We have one more question in here.
Hi, I'm Jenny. I work for a production company in Sweden. We make a lot of productions for SR, our public service, and I think it would be hard to make this kind of production for them because it's political. How is that with DR? How does it work?
Can I answer that? This was a big question actually during the podcast. Also just getting the funding for it. There was a question of how political will it be? And not just political, but how party political. Does it make sense? Do I take sides these are the best? Or basically, it was tricky. And I think it was only because if I came from the outside, I don't think this would have worked. When I mean outside, I mean if I didn't know Sandra and I wasn't already there. So there was a lot of trust from the organization that we're seeing eye to eye on this, and we're going to talk about it as we go along. But people have been very supportive, but on certain small issues, there has been concern because it's a public service institution, right? So
Fuck the white lady. And
that basically what I was told was, as long as I say this is my feelings and my opinion, and not the entirety of the public service world. That's actually, I haven't heard anything about that. There were some other issues, but not, also because that was sort of like art, because it was a rap song, right? So you can't really regulate it. But it was a bit tricky. Really tricky.
We have a time
she had to deal with it.
We have a time for one really quick question. Is there any at the moment? Okay, everything is crystal clear, and it always tells that the session is great when it raises so many questions. Thank you so much, Babak Vakili. Thank you for the great questions, and all the best for you in the future also.